Hello, Holly Garber. Welcome to The First Word.
Thanks, Tori. It's so nice to be here.
Well, for all the listeners who wouldn't know this, but you actually have helped me from the get-go build The First Word and pivot a million times and create, I guess, all of the focus points. So you've really been a huge part of this as a mentor, a coach, a friend. I think you've seen me laugh and cry, and you've been there on all the different points. And it's been a journey, but it's so nice to get to share your voice with everybody because we'll go through your career to date, but at the moment you are so heavily invested in new brands like myself, really find their feet and work out what works and what doesn't. So you've got a lot of wisdom, so much that I was lucky enough to be witness to, but it's such a pleasure to have you on the potty today.
Oh, thank you. That's so beautiful. Yeah, we had fun working together, didn't we? We had a good time doing that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it was great. And I love seeing what you're doing now with The First Word.
Well, every email I get, and as I go back, I always think, how would Holly create this email? In that you are so concise and clear, and I'm more of a rambler, so I always think, how would Holly go about this email response?
All that PR training,
helpful.
all that PR training of mine.
All that PR training.
Yeah.
So that's a nice place to start. So why don't you walk us through the earlier? So now you're consulting brands. You've also got an advice column, which is Hello Holly, fabulous. But walk us through how your career, and then of course Holly Golightly, which was your very, very successful PR firm. But yeah, walk us through your career to date.
Okay. Well, I didn't really know what I wanted to do when I was younger, but I sort of worked out that I wanted to be in fashion and I wanted to work in female-owned businesses. And I was lucky enough to get a job as a PR assistant at Sass & Bide in the early 2000s. And that was a really great experience. I wasn't there for very long. I was only there for about 18 months. And then my mum called me one day when I was at work and said that her friend Morna, who had a PR and sales agency, was closing down her agency and that I should approach Morna to see if she would refer any of her clients to me if I was going to, to see if I could open my own agency, which my mum knew I always wanted to have my own business. I wasn't quite sure what that business was going to be, but having my own business was something that I always wanted to do. So I did that, and Morna had 6 clients, and I decided that if I got 2 of them, then I would leave Sass & Bide and start the agency. And I got all 6 of them, so that was amazing. And then I'd also had a conversation a couple of months before that, just really coincidentally, with Camilla Freeman, who was someone that I knew in those days socially. And she'd said, if you ever start your own agency, then let Marc and I know because we would love to talk to you about that. And so I rang her and said, remember that conversation we had? Well, I'm going to start my own agency. So then they came on as a client as well. So then I started, a couple of months
Camilla and Marc
later,
was one of your earliest clients.
Yes. Yeah, they were one of my first clients. And it was a group of young Australian designers that Golightly started with. So yeah, sort of about 2 months after all of that, I started the agency, and 6 weeks after that, we did Fashion Week, which I had never done before. And I think we did 7 or 8 shows or something. It was all very overwhelming and amazing. And then the agency ran for 15 years after that. So we definitely started very much in that young Australian designer space. And then we moved into high street for a while. So we did a lot of work with brands like ASOS and Uniqlo. And then we did quite a lot in the D2C space when that was sort of like really on the rise. So with brands like Allbirds and Away. And then we did a little bit of work in the luxury space as well, doing events. So all predominantly in fashion. And then towards the end as well, we opened a talent arm for the agency. So we were managing some really, really interesting, wonderful talent there as well. And yeah, so that I started the business in 2005 when I was 24, and then we closed it in 2020. We closed it, or I closed it rather, 15 years to the month. So it started in March 2005 and it closed in March 2020. So, yeah.
So you were 24.
Yes, which was great because I didn't know enough to be scared.
Yeah. So
It was really
what was
push.
your position at Sassenbide? What were you doing with Sassenbide before you started Holly Golightly?
I was the PR assistant.
Oh wow, so it's definitely in your blood. PR through and through is you.
I don't think I was ever a particularly good publicist, to be honest. But I think that the work that I do now plays more to my strengths. And that was sort of the type of PR that I offered at that time, which is really about thinking about the business and the founder and what they want and helping work out what is needed. In that time, sort of it was through the medium of PR to help support the business they wanted to have, basically, and the brand that they wanted to build. And I think I can help people work out their vision. I'm quite good at sort of drawing that out of them, I think, and then helping them work out how to action that vision. So I think that was sort of what I did well through the agency versus being like a really excellent like cold caller or pitcher or, you know, pitcher of stories or anything like that. But then obviously it wasn't just me. I had a team.
I think I've lost you. Are you there?
Are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Where did you lose me?
I think it dropped out.
Sorry, we're back.
Yeah, we're back. I don't know where it dropped out. That's all.
That's all right. It probably didn't drop out. I think there's just a bit of freeze at either end.
Okay, all right. So I was just saying that I had a really great team. So very early on, I began to build a team around me in terms of whatever I wasn't good at. So I don't think I was particularly that great at pitching stories as a publicist, but I would build a team around me that had the skills that I didn't, so that I could do what I did best and they could do what they did best, so that we were providing everything that the clients needed, but not everything we weren't expecting everything to come just from one person on the team, just from me or just from anyone else. It was working as a team to provide the type of service that we wanted to provide. So yeah, so I don't consider myself like a natural publicist in any way, but I do love brand and I do love strategy, and PR definitely plays into that. So, and I love stories as well, and PR definitely plays into that. Yeah.
So I suppose now, in a world where there are so many brands and there's so many platforms to advertise those brands, when it comes to PR, advertising and marketing, there's a lot of grey area, but they're obviously very unique aspects to any brand. How would you describe the fundamental differences between advertising, PR and marketing? And is there one? Obviously, PR is, you know, what you've got your background in, but moving forward now with, you know, the climate we're in and the world that we live in, what are you finding is the most successful with any brand, or is it still a combination of all three?
Well, I really consider advertising and PR to be forms of marketing. I think that when I started, the lines between PR and marketing were clearer and more defined. And I think that they have more overlapping points now through social media and other things. But advertising is really marketing that you pay for, and PR is marketing that you earn. So in theory, you shouldn't be paying for PR. If you pay for a story, then that is really an advertorial. It's not actually editorial, like it's not earned media. And in fashion, very much so, like in the industry that I was in, budgets were always very, very tight. So PR was incredibly important. So when I started working with brands, and for, you know, at least probably even up to maybe the first 10 years, nobody did advertising. Nobody had, none of the brands I worked with really had money for advertising. I mean, I worked with brands like ASOS Originals, and they obviously had money for advertising, but small Australian brands didn't really have money for advertising at all. And social media didn't exist. So they weren't doing digital marketing either. So PR was crucial. Like if they were going to have, if those brands had two functions, it was going to be, they would have a publicist and they would have like a PR agency and a sales agency. So they were the two main things that they were focusing on. Now, the marketing onus on brands is so much bigger, and they have to be so much more sophisticated in how they market. So even a small brand these days might be doing both PR and advertising. They might be doing multiple different forms of marketing, or they might just be doing one, depending on what they're doing. So, but in terms of like ordering that in my head, I kind of go, well, it's marketing, and then advertising is one function of marketing, and then we could say that PR is another function of marketing.
So when you say PR is earned, how does someone like you, a PR agency, make money?
Oh, sorry. So we charge the clients for the work that we do. So, and that work includes going to the media and saying, I've got this client, they have just launched this brand. This is the story behind the brand. Would you be interested in writing a story on it? I can really see that it would fit really well on this page of your publication. And we could, you know, here's the angle for the story that we're doing. But you don't pay for that placement in the magazine. That is like what's called an earned placement. Yeah, or publication, not just a magazine, in the publication. But it's got really blurry because PR these days, a lot of publicists work with social media and work with influencers and run the influencer campaign. And most influencer campaigns these days, you are paying for that content. So that's a change where, you know, you're in PR, but you're doing work that contains budget in a different way. Like obviously previous in PR, you would have budget. You'd have budget for doing events or doing a fashion show or doing things like that. You wouldn't have budget for placing a story because that wasn't a necessary part of the story, unless you were, say, doing something like a junket where you were taking a bunch of journalists on a trip, and then you need to have the budget for that. But yeah, you're not paying for the placement. And that's the tricky thing about PR. If you are buying advertising, you're like, you create the content. So you create, here's the image. If it's in say a magazine, here's the image, here's the tagline, here's all the information. You negotiate with them. I would like a double page spread up front in the magazine. I would like it to be in the September issue, you know, blah, 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 blah. But with PR, you shape up the story, you pitch it to the publication, and you talk about, look, ideally, I would really like this to run on this date and in this way. And could you give us 2 pages? You know, how much, you know, coverage can you give us? And you can sort of say, you've got the exclusive, so you run first, but you can't go any earlier than this because the story isn't relevant until the product or whatever it is launches on this date. But you don't have any say on the final outcome of the story.
Okay.
And that is one of the really, really tricky things about PR. Or your story can just get bumped because something else better comes up, even though you've done all the work and given the interviews and given the imagery and all those type of things. So in a way, when you're working with advertising, you have a lot more control because of you're effectively paying for that control in a way. But then with PR, because it is earned, and this is something that is changing over time, but in theory, the sort of theory is that there's more kudos to it because the publication is choosing to feature you. And by choosing to feature you, they're basically saying this brand or this business is worth covering. They are worth us giving the story to because they've got a great story or they've got a great product or they've got a launch happening or whatever it is. So theoretically, PR has more kudos, but that's sort of changed. Like I don't think it's not that cut and dry anymore. So yeah.
I guess with the element of storytelling in PR, it's so fascinating watching brands now because brands are so inside out. We see all the behind the scenes and I'm even reading, and I don't know much about her, but I'm reading Tash Oakley's book bio. What's it called? Excessively Obsessed, and it's the story of her. It's the story of Monday Swimwear and how she's made her money and her multiple brands that she works for. And it's a really great insight if anyone's ever very skeptical about particular women who start off as influencers, because what people forget is they might have earned a lot of money to create these brands, but the person doing all of the work is still them. Like this, so reading their stories about how they came to create these big multi-million-dollar brands is phenomenal, because they're the ones that are doing the hard yards. But it's interesting because I always think of that saying, no PR is bad PR. Is that like any story you put out there, if it effectively brings eyes to the brand or the story, and then more the awareness piece is, you know, exacerbated because of that. Do you find there's truth in that saying, all PR is good PR, or have you definitely seen some PR that you've thought, ooh, dicey?
I think in a digital landscape, there can be such a thing as bad PR, definitely, because those bad stories can gain a lot of momentum and they can spread really, really, really far and wide, and they can become problematic. In the old days, if you got a bad story in one newspaper and it didn't go any further than that newspaper, and that newspaper isn't available digitally anywhere else, and the next day it's in the trash, its impact is lesser, I would say, potentially. But I think it also comes back to the type of brand you want to be. Like, if you've positioned yourself as a really ethical, authentic brand, and you suddenly get a story saying that's all crap, and you use really bad factories, and you've lied about this and you've lied about that, then, you know, I think that will definitely have a detrimental effect. If you are a more controversial brand or a more controversial person, I think we all know plenty of people like that in the media at the moment, then sometimes no PR is bad PR, because all it does is just create further controversy, and you're kind of loved for that controversy in a way. So, but I think this is PR in a nutshell. It's so nuanced. It's so much about this individual brand with this individual founder at this moment in time. Like, it's just not cookie cutter. It's really can be quite specific. Yeah. In what is right for that individual person, brand, business, whatever it is not going to be what's right for this other one over here, even if they're similar.
I can sort of see that with PR, and the way it works is it's really created cancel culture, because I guess without PR and without the ability to see stories be so quickly run through the media with everyone's comments, I don't think cancel culture would be anywhere near as dire as it is. What was one of the most prominent in your, back when you were, you know, Golightly was busy? Is there a PR moment that you thought was that you're really proud of to this day? Probably many.
Oh, that I'm really proud of, that we were involved in. When Dion Lee did his show at the Sydney Opera House, that was amazing. And it was the first time a designer had ever shown at the Opera House. It was an incredible show. The imagery was amazing afterwards, and the energy in the room at the time was amazing. It was just one of those, perfect moments, perfect places, perfect times moments, which was great. So I loved being part of that. Launching ASOS in Australia was pretty fun as well. We did that. That was really fun. I know they're kind of high street and it's not the same now, but that was a really, really fun moment. I'd say those two.
God, I remember ASOS early on in my career. I was a receptionist, and I think I would spend 6 out of every 8 days just scrolling ASOS.
Yeah, right.
It was so good.
And actually, really interestingly, when we worked with them, they had this really interesting approach to marketing at that time. This is a long time ago now, but they didn't advertise, but they said, so instead we're going to take our marketing budget and we spend our marketing budget offering free shipping, because that is the best form of marketing that we can do. And so that's an interesting way of looking at marketing. Like, you know, marketing can be so many different things. And for them, it was like the main barrier for conversion for customers was shipping costs. And so if we offer free shipping, no matter what the cost of the item is, so they would be losing so much money on a lot of the shipping that they were doing, a lot of the items they were selling, but that was where they chose to spend their marketing budget. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, so losing money short term, but gaining so much.
But gaining customers, yeah, and gaining trust. Yeah.
100%, yeah. Spend a bit of money to lose a bit of money to make a bit of money. So if we move forward, so you shut down Golightly PR, and then had you had your kids at this stage? And then when did that kind of morph into you wanting to consult and wanting to work more closely with brands?
Well, I closed Golightly during COVID, and it's something that I'd been working towards for quite a while. I knew that as I was approaching 40 at that time, that I wanted to sort of move into a second career. I knew I didn't want to run the agency anymore, and I didn't want to work directly in PR anymore. So I closed that in 2020. I was involved in another business at that time, so I spent about sort of most of 2020 working quite heavily in that business, and then into 2021. And I went back to university and did a degree during that time as well, which is something that I'd always wanted to do, a second degree. And then as that all kind of came, well, before I finished my degree, I was still studying, but once I left the other business that I was part of, I was sort of thinking about what I wanted to do next. And I had been thinking for a really, really, really long time about what I wanted to do next. And I had found it kind of impossible to ascertain that while I still had Golightly. Golightly seemed to sort of take up my entire horizon. I couldn't work out what my next steps would be. And so I just spent some time thinking about what I really loved doing, what I felt that I was good at, what type of structure I wanted to work under. Like, I knew that for a period of time, I didn't want to have staff. I didn't want to have a team. I just wanted to work by myself. And I also really love working one-on-one with people, like quite, or in small groups. And so I sort of worked out that doing what I'm doing now, which is sort of a blend of consulting and coaching for founders and businesses and brands, but also just for individuals who are working out what their next steps are in their career, is sort of this great overlapping intersection of all the things that I really, really love, really, really enjoy, and that I feel that I'm sort of, my strengths are best suited to. So yeah. And that was 2022 that all kind of got confirmed.
Do you think, because you mentioned you were approaching 40, did that milestone have anything to do with this epiphany that you wanted a bit of a pivot in your life?
Yeah. Well, sorry, wait a second. Memory. True or not, or something that I imagine, I'm not sure, but I have this memory of when I started Golightly of kind of going, oh, I'll do this for 5 years, maybe I'll do it for 10. Just sort of being like, I remember thinking like, I can't really see myself ever doing this for longer than 15 years. And as that 15-year mark got nearer, that felt truer and truer. And I kind of was like, I loved my business. I had the most amazing team. I worked with incredible clients. I had all these good experiences. But I got to the point where I was like, I don't want any more of this experience. Like, I have had enough of this particular experience. It's been incredible, but I'm ready for something really, really new. And yeah, with 40 coming up, it was that thing of, well, I don't want to wait till I'm 50. Not that I couldn't choose a moment between 40 and 50, but it seemed like this great marker. Yeah. And then when COVID happened, I was like, okay, right, great. Because I knew that COVID was going to mean that having to really steer the business through a challenging time. And I was like, I don't have the energy or the motivation or the focus for this business, to do that for this business. And then, yes, that all coincided with just being the year that I turned 40 in 2020. So it definitely had something to do with it. But I also had this thought at one point where I was like, well, I mean, I've had a job since the moment I could legally be employed, but I sort of consider like my 20s, the start of my 20s, the start of my career. So I was like, turning 40, I was like, I've worked for 20 years. but I could work for another 30. I actually have more work ahead of me potentially than I do behind me. So let's change. Like, let's do something else. Let's find something else that is, you know, the experience that you want to have.
I think because I used to work in a modeling agency as a booker, I was always highly aware of Golightly PR, because you were like you were in the heart of fast fashion, Australian high-end fashion. And then I was reading a Substack, which you now have a brilliant Substack. We'll talk about that. But I was reading Zara Wong's, and she was talking about you and an interview you did. And I was like, Holly Garber. And then you mentioned went into Golightly. And I think that's where I first came across you branching out and consulting. So for someone like me who was starting business, I was like, oh, I need access to Holly. Anyway, and that's how I found you. But working together, it was very clear from the start that because you've had a phenomenal business, you're a mum, you've pivoted your career, which is huge. You're wise and rational, but you're also very you're very you're very good at empathetic decision making, and empathy there is not to be replaced with emotional. I think you always had, I think I come from an emotional place, whereas you've got this amazing ability to, in a business sense, park the emotion and create something that was more business appropriate, and sort of channel that energy into something that was more business appropriate. And that's what you taught me. And we would often speak about how I would create a lot of fluff around emails or the niceties, or I think my problem was getting to the point. So you and I always worked around, okay, well, this is what the first word, but where do you want to go? What's the point? And you said one day, still sticks in my head. You said, Tori, it's kind, because I think with me, I never wanted to offend anyone. And you said, Tori, it's kind to be clear. And you were saying that, people are time poor. People also want to help you, but they want to know how to help you. So you need to be clear. So if you're going to send an email, don't fluff it up. Just say what it is that you want. And I always think about that, because I always think that women especially have this, this subtle need to be very accommodating and very kind and very approachable and what's the word? Very convenient. But working with you showed me that it is kind to be clear, and it's a better business model, really, if you just get straight to the point. So when it comes to women in business, this getting over this fear of always having to be a people pleaser, where do you see, what's your advice? Well, not your advice, but what's your sort of outlook on that feeling of women to always be the yes person?
Yeah, okay. First of all, I don't want to take credit, because clear as kind is actually from Brene Brown. So I didn't come up with that myself, but I 100% support it and believe it. Like all my work is in communication, right? So my background is in PR, and now what I do with coaching and consulting, it's really like the nuts and bolts of it is in communicating with other people. Like when you and I are in session, we're communicating. I'm doing everything in my power to understand what you're saying, but also help you understand what you're saying. So reflecting back to you what you're saying. And I think that clear communication is actually really challenging. And so when we let ourselves get in the way with too many modifiers and too much fluff, we're making it really, really hard to get across what we're trying to get across. Now, the people pleasing and the fear of maybe being clear, or the fear of asking for what we want to ask for, I think is so common. And it's not just for women, it's for men as well. And a lot of people struggle with it. But there's a lot of things in that, right? Like I often say to people, it's so human and it's so normal to be scared and to feel fear about doing these things. But you sort of have to feel the fear and do it anyway. So you don't want to let the fear stop you from doing it. And with people pleasing, it's sort of that thing of like, you don't want to let trying to like please other people and do what you think they want you to do stop you from doing what you really want to do, because that's
Mm.
all that's doing is getting in the way of you working out what it is that you want or what's right for you. And I also don't think you're like necessarily, you're not doing the other person like you're definitely doing yourself a disservice, but you can also do the other person a disservice, because you can end up quite resentful if you're doing a bunch of stuff that you don't want to do for somebody else in the name of people pleasing. You can actually end up really resentful, and it's sort of a waste of everybody's time. But I also think that those are big changes to make, right? If you are someone who's like, I've spent 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years being a people pleaser and being worried about advocating for myself and choosing what's right for me, we can't expect that someone's going to go be that like that one day and the next day they're going to be completely different. So I think the first thing is basically reflecting on the behavior and understanding that we're doing it and noticing it within ourselves, and then trying to understand, why are we doing that? Like, where have we learnt that from? Why do we think that that's a good strategy for interacting with other people? And then you can very, very gently, slowly move through how you change that and making those changes. And they're not immediate and they can be very, very slow. But in the case for you, Tori, like, I think it was a mix of me saying, sort of like not giving you permission, but almost saying to you, like, here's another way of thinking about that thing. You think you're doing the right thing by writing in that way. But another way of thinking about that is actually you're not getting what you want and you're not helping the other person understand what you want. So this is just like another like kind of perspective shift on it. And then part of it, I think, was also like modeling it. So in all our emails, when I'm emailing you, you're like, oh, I'm seeing someone write really clearly and directly. And then I would sometimes work with you on editing your emails, right? We'd kind of go back and forth and edit language as well. So there was also that thing of like seeing it done, like kind of being like, oh, that's what you, because one thing for me to say to you, write clearer emails or write more direct emails. And you're like, well, yeah, well, what does that mean? What do you mean when you say that? But actually helping you through writing them and helping you have a different perspective on why you would write like that, I think is part of making that shift as well. I think I just went a little bit in a circle with that answer, but hopefully I answered the question.
No, totally. And it's the littlest changes about, if you're reaching out to someone wanting to work with them or collaborate or even approach them for a job, for instance, for some people. But, it's all about shifting, I guess, is what we worked for, the format of the email. Like, don't be afraid to put what you're asking for or what you want up the top. It doesn't make you someone who's rude or obnoxious. It's helping them understand this is what she wants. Okay, I've got the time to now delve. It's actually doing them a favor. So it is all in the way, you're so right, of the way you think about it. But it is just that fear. But I guess that fear just proves you are really passionate about it, and you're very aware of you're very aware of not getting what you want, like losing that hope, which is why it feels fuller.
And I think that sometimes, like, you can do the same thing with the fear, right? You're like, oh, I feel really nervous about this. I'm feeling really worried. And then you kind of go, okay, well, why? Oh, because it's really important to me. And it's making me feel vulnerable to put myself out there and do this thing that is really important to me. And so we can kind of, if we don't examine the fear, we can just be like, I'm scared, so I'm not going to do it. But instead, we can look at the fear and be like, yeah, this is something I really want. There's a part of me that is just so excited about the possibility of this. And so I'm going to use that fear as a motivator, because that fear is actually telling me something, and I can kind of convert that into motivation of doing this, because how annoyed am I going to be if I let that fear stop me? Because this is actually really important to me. So, yeah.
I love lately just a lot of people who, have a soapbox to stand on, and they're talking about anxiety. A lot of them are actually now really grateful for that anxiety, because it's forcing them to rethink, or it's reminding them they're passionate, or it's reminding them to pivot, or whatever it is. But it has a purpose. It's your body's it's your body's protective mechanism. So fear and anxiety, whatever else it is, it's there for a reason, and it's definitely not a sign to not do something. It's probably the opposite.
Yeah, and you said that thing before about emotions and how like I'm quite sort of pragmatic, and I am, but it's because I'm also really emotional. And so the pragmatism is kind of a balance to that, because like everybody, I have a lot of emotions and they're big and unwieldy, but I don't want to be sort of like at the mercy of my emotions. I want to feel them and I want to understand what they're telling me, but I don't want them to dictate my life in a way that is sort of unhealthy and I'm overpowered by them. So I sort of always think like most things in life are 50% how you feel about it and 50% what are you going to do about it? Like, what are the actions that you're going to take? And we can think about businesses in this way as well, right? Like it's like, what is the business that you want to build? Like, what gets you excited? What makes you feel like really passionate and, you know, brings up all these good emotions and gives you all these good experiences? But also, what is the reality of the situation? What moment of life are you in right now? What are your finances like? What's the economic landscape like? We have to like balance both those things in terms of being able to, I think, make progress forward.
Yeah, I think operating with a pragmatic mindset is often, or pretty much always, the most balanced way of thinking about it, I guess. Just in terms of harnessing your energy, to be pragmatic is to be efficient, but it's also to use your feelings to motivate your action, but to not let the emotion overpower or hold you back, or you know, paint you in a picture that I guess isn't really you. So yeah, I learned so much from you, just so you know.
Thanks, Tori.
So now you've kind of pivoted once again, but to expand your consulting, you've taken the road, I guess, of almost like an agony aunt, and you're doing an advice column, which is amazing.
Yeah.
So tell us, when people write to you, have you found there's a common consistency? And is it women and men, or is it mainly women, or what's the balance?
Yeah, so I launched my Substack last year more as a personal thing because I wanted to get better at writing. And I also wanted to tell people about what I was doing with work and sort of not explain how I work, but give a sense of how I work. And so I do that through my Substack. And then I love advice columns. I love reading advice columns. And I sort of had one of those thoughts one day, you know, those thoughts that just kind of like come up from the back of your head, or they come up from somewhere and you're like, oh yeah, actually. And I was like, oh, I've always wanted to write an advice column, and I've got Substack. So why don't I just write one? Like, I don't need to wait for a publication to invite me to write an advice column for them. I'll just write one through my Substack. And so the split of questions that I've got so far, I've got like a handful of questions. Yeah, it's a male, pretty much an even male female split, and it's about work. So you know, like what I'm asking, if people have questions, I'm asking for them to be within the framework of work or business or career or something like that. It's not, you know, general life per se. And the questions so far, some of them are general, but some of them definitely speak to like my background in communications or my background in the fashion industry. Yeah, they're a bit of a mix, but they're generally, the questions I've had so far, I'm kind of like, oh, they're good questions for me. So that's been quite good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is a lot of it moving forward? Are a lot of people's questions about growing brand awareness, or is it mainly about improving profit?
They're mainly about changes and transitions. So a lot of the work that I do now is about changes and transitions. So it might be that you want to change your career, or it might be that your business is at this point and it's had 5 years of organic growth and that's been great. But now you kind of want to shape it up and you want to work out what is the direction for the next 5 years. You're in a moment of transition with your business. Or yeah, so various things, or like, you know, even with you had a very, very young business. I often work with people who have very, very young businesses, and it's about either helping get them started or helping just kind of like move them forward like quite a bit, that type of thing. So a lot of the questions are about transition. Nothing really, like you said, profit, nothing really about money or finances at this stage, which, you know, is like my little obsession. I love to talk about how is your business going to make money? What is the profit model? Do you have enough money to live your life the way you want to live your life? Like, I love that financial discussion. I think often people leave it behind. Not everyone, but some people. But yeah, not as pointed as they're not as pointed as what you just said. They tend to be more general questions.
Yeah, the finance sector is I did love your secret obsession with that. And you said, Tori, how much, I think we were doing a timeline, and I think we were talking about year 2 or year 3 or like, and you said, what do you envision? What would you like to be making at X point? And I was like, oh shit, I was so scared to say a number. And I was like, why am I so scared? I know what that number is. Why am I so scared to write it down? And why am I so scared to show Holly? And that was such a big moment. But I'm so glad you asked me that, because I don't know what the fear around money or finance. So, you know, obviously the day-to-day financial survival is hard, but dreaming and talking about those dreams sometimes is equally as hard. But you should never be embarrassed or ashamed to write that number down and share with. And it doesn't, it's a goal. It's not a dream. There's a bit of a difference there. You're working towards that. You're not dreaming something that could never be a reality.
But also, like, you know, businesses have limitations, and people have limitations in terms of the amount of hours in the day or their other commitments and things like that. And so if you say, I want to turn over $5 million in 1 year, well, you need to have a pretty specific business and a pretty specific business model and operations to make that happen. So when I'm working with someone, I really need to understand, like, what do you want to earn? What do you want that business to turn over? What's the growth trajectory you're aiming for? Because, like, do you have the right business model for that? And, you know, if you're a single founder, you might need to build a team. Like, you don't need to spend money to make money. So that financial thing is so crucial in the process of building a business, but also in terms of work. Like, if someone's changing careers, but they've got really, really high financial commitments that they need to service a mortgage and school fees and look after children and all these different things, and they're the main income earner in their family. Well, you don't have time to take 3 years out to go back to university and pay for a master's degree and not earn anything, unless you've got a certain amount of money in the bank to do that. So, you know, when we're talking about that sort of like 50% feelings, 50% pragmatic reality, like, money is a big part of that. What is the pragmatic reality of the situation?
So I guess since COVID, there's been a real push of people going out on their own, and sort of that, I think everyone got a big wake up call, like, you know, life is short. If you've got a goal, go out and face it. And also find the flexible work nature so you can have your family and, you know, do all that. And COVID showed us we can work at home, etc. So now that there are so many businesses blooming, which is great, if and I'm sure this will speak to many people listening who are in the stage of growing a business, but if they are in that true infancy stage, and especially to those who want to find funding, whether it's, you know, investment or whatever it may be, if they are looking at, okay, what can we be doing with a really limited budget? Do you have advice in terms of, okay, you've got not much to spend, but there is a way to be really creative and resourceful, but is there some kind of formula you look to, or is it very dependent on, because it's a lot I know for the first word, it's, you know, to get digital, to do all the digital and the marketing, it's a lot. If you bring someone on, you're spending a lot. You know, people say do Facebook advertising, you know, do Facebook advertising, but you need a lot to put into that. So it can be hard thinking, okay, I've got, let's just dumb it down. I've got $100 to spend. How am I going to spend that 100? Because a lot of it is trial and error. But of course, when you trial and error, you go down to 100 to 80 to 50. So you dwindle.
Mm.
So in
Mm.
those infancy stages for businesses, what would you say is the wise way to work out how to allocate those dollars?
Okay, that's such a big question.
It's a big question.
But first of all, I think there's a difference between building a founder-led or personality-led brand and a brand-led brand. And as a general rule, if you have a brand-led business or brand-led brand, you need more money to spend on marketing, because with a founder or personality-led brand, you can use that person to create interest and content and PR. You can use that person basically in a way that is less investment heavy than in having to push the brand, which really requires a lot of paid marketing if it is brand led. Not all the time, but I'm just making it sort of like a general statement there. What I would say in terms of that question, if you have a limited budget, is nearly every single business needs some form of marketing. In this day and age, it's very, very difficult to build a successful business without marketing. Now, I'm sure there are some exceptions to that rule, because there are exceptions to every single rule, but in general, you need some form of marketing. If you have a very small business and a very small team and a very small budget, then you are going to have to do most of that marketing yourself, because you're not going to be able to your point, bring someone on. You're probably not going to be able to afford to bring on a social media strategist on their own retainer, who then needs budget to actually do their work. Like, that might be out of reach. But if I had a teeny weeny budget, I then would be going, what can I do that is grassroots led to try and build community? Because the cheapest form of marketing is word of mouth. And referrals and testimonials and word of mouth is really, really, really valuable, because it basically plays into influence. And we know social media is built on influence, right? We know the importance of influence in this day and age, but it is very real. So versus an influencer telling you about this great thing, but it says ad and we all know they've been paid to do it. Your neighbor saying to you, oh my God, I just tried this nappy brand. They're new. It's amazing. They've been so great and they're really, really affordable. And then your sister-in-law saying the same thing. And then you walk into a shop and they're on the shelves. I mean, that's a jump, because if it's a tiny brand, they're probably not going to be retailed in a retailer, but let's say. But that is going to be, that word of mouth is going to be your most effective thing to get visibility and awareness. And if we think about converting customers, it is rare that customers convert like actually put money down the first time they see something. It's really about building multiple touch points. So word of mouth can be your first touch point, and that is really, really great. And then you kind of look at, okay, well, what can I do organically? Well, social media, I can do organically. And to a point, some content you can build organically. So obviously doing an amazing campaign is going to be a really, really expensive outlay. What is the free content that you can create and build and use? And then I think it really does come down to what you said. It's that experimentation. It's like, okay, well, I've gotten as far as I can get organically. So I've done organic content, which I've done in a low investment way. I've tried to build word of mouth. I've taken referrals and testimonials and I've shared them through my organic content. And there are other things you can do as well, but I've done those things, and now I've got $100 and I'm going to see what boosting this post does, and does this one work? But that really then comes into self-education. You then need to go in and be like, Googling, what is the best use of, like, how do I get the most out of Instagram if I have a nappy brand with this many followers? Like, get really specific about, trying to find out what works for that type of brand in that niche on the social media platform that you're choosing to work on. Because I'm going to assume that that's what they're working on, if they've only got a small budget, that they're working on a social media platform.
I think there's so much to be said for how much every human, regardless of how everyone is so busy, we know this much. However, everyone has such a huge capacity to learn. So you can look at something like, whoa, how did that brand do that? You can learn how to do it. You do as you say, you Google it, you talk, you ask. But it is, I guess, as you're saying, with a small, because I think I started out saying I've got a really small following, how do I increase awareness? But it took me a long time to realize, let's say you started off with 100 followers and, you aspire to have 100,000. You've got 100 people there that are so invested in you. You need to invest
Yeah.
back in them and then really be, kind to them, generate what they repay the favor, create, that they're loving. So keep on doing it, ask them questions, knowing that if you do that, then they might refer you on. So every one of those people might refer you on. So all of a sudden you've got 200 followers. So you can really boil it back to basics, but we shouldn't, I guess, go so far that we become, that we forget what we already have, So,
Yeah. I think that's a really important point. And I often say to people who are starting businesses, I was like, you likely know your first customers. Your first customers are already in your network and they're in your community. And we know that generally as follower numbers increase, regardless of what platform you're on, engagement decreases because you're attracting more and more people who really aren't that interested in your product. They're a little bit interested, but they're not as interested as the very first people that followed you. So yes, creating really strong bonds with your initial community in whatever way, shape or form that takes is going to be, the best way to grow your business. There's a lot of businesses these days that I think do really well from a grassroots approach.
Yeah. Well, using me as an example, so when we started working together, the first word looked very different. It was a full production. There was multiple women on set. There was lights, camera, action, so to speak. And that was really, loved it. And that was my vision, but it was really costly and it was also timely. So we talked a lot about, well, how can we talked about it. How can we continue but make changes, but still have that core value? And the podcasting approach was so accessible. And it's not a step back, it's a pivot, knowing that you're still aspiring to get where, to get to the dream. But sometimes you have to make change. You have to make transitions to continue and to keep learning, I guess. So there's so much to be said that I don't want to say one step back and two steps forward, because it's not a step back, but it's a step to the side. You have to play around with things to work out how to grow. And I think at that small budget end, where I was, especially when we were working together, that was certainly a thing. You just have to be really creative and really brave in your, step away from what you think is comfortable and see how that is.
Yeah, and that's interesting, right? Because we sort of had to distill it back to like, what is the mission of the business? And what is it? What are you trying to create and what are you trying to do? And in your head, you had, this is what I'm trying to create and this is the format in which I want to create it. But we got to the point where it was kind of like, that format isn't actually quite right for now for a number of reasons, money, but also like audience and all those type of things. And so, yeah, it's not a step back. It's more just like, what's a better fit? And I talked about that before when I was talking about business models. Like sometimes people are kind of like, I want this and I'm going to do it through this business model. And it's like, well, that's a really difficult way to do that. Maybe you need to change the way you're doing it. And, in this day and age as well, like, it's not like 10 years ago, which if you wanted to create a business, you had to do a custom build of a website and all that kind of thing. There's a platform for everything these days. So there's so many ways to get everything. So many ways to get a business up and running or not even up and running, but like tested and then up and running. And then you kind of go, okay, this is stage one. And, we don't want to stay here forever, but this is what it's going to get us grassroots engagement.
Yeah.
And then stage two looks like this. And, you progress it out as you go along.
And there's a lot to be said for grassroots. I appreciate the amount. Now any brand I look at, I'm like, I know how much time and effort that you are putting into that. It is so, but you do learn so much, like holistically, about your business when you build every granular inch from the bottom. It is amazing. So I think for anyone listening who gets feared because they don't have enough time, money, expertise, there's not enough gloss, it doesn't matter. Like it really doesn't. If you want it that bad, it will come. But I think sometimes an outsider's perspective, like certainly me working with you, the business now looks very different than it did, but it's much stronger. But you do need to be brave and show someone your vision for them to not pick it apart, but for them to say, okay, I see it, but what about we try it from this perspective, and that can be really uncomfortable, because sometimes I don't at all. I'm not one of those people who always thinks I'm right, but I get really emotionally attached to an idea. So to change it, it's like, oh, how can I possibly change it? And, working with the other moms, I'm like, I want to continue working with them, but you do have to think pragmatically, logically, rationally to get the momentum going. Because if you let those emotions, as we were talking about before, get in the way, I think you're only doing yourself a disservice.
Yeah, and I think this is where getting to the core of what you want is really important, because sometimes we can get distracted by not the window dressing, but how things look.
Yeah.
Whereas whether it's a business or a life or a relationship or whatever it is, if we really, really, really understand what is the most important part to us, then to your point, we can be more malleable, and not malleable, but we can be more flexible with change of like, oh, it's not going to look like this, it's going to look like this, but it's still got the essence of what I'm going for. And then you buy yourself time, right? Like you buy yourself time to get to where you eventually want to be, or you change your mind in the process and you're like, oh, actually, I wanted it to look like that, but I don't even want it to look like that. It's all going in this direction that I could never have imagined, but is amazing in and of itself.
Yes.
So, but yes, I do think like for a solo founder, it's really, really difficult to work out everything for yourself. Like as you said, there's so much self-education involved, and that's a really awesome part of the process, is like all the different things you learn. But also sometimes you need another point of view to come in and be like, well, let's look at it this way. Let's look at it this way. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? Because otherwise it's just you, like often it's just you and a computer. And you're just like, sometimes, I think I use this expression with you. Sometimes it feels a little bit like you're just like yelling into the void, like, hello, is anyone there? Like, it's just, you need something to bounce off sometimes. So
absolutely.
Yeah,
and
that's the work we did together.
It's helpful when that person isn't a parent, a wife, a husband, an auntie, a friend.
A best mate. Yeah.
It can be really sticky, because often Will gives me, constructive criticism, and instantly I'm like, how fucking dare you?
Yeah.
Because there's that emotional, but I know what he's saying. It comes from the heart, and it's right most of the time. But there's that, I have that defense. But with someone like you, I'm like, oh yes, that is, it does take, it's good sometimes to find someone that you have a separation from, for those fresh eyes, so you don't emotionally react to whatever they're saying.
Yeah.
And also some people are like, no, don't change anything, it's great, because they don't want to hurt your feelings. So it's but it's, I think what you were going back to as well earlier in the chat, saying when you're working with founders, working out what their lifestyle looks like. So actually thinking whatever you want to create, does it actually suit your lifestyle? So for me, with 2 young kids, a podcast is actually perfect, because I'm at home with, in the house with the kids but if it's studio and everything else, it's not actually that available to me to do that. So sometimes thinking on that, what actually fits, thinking of it day to day, not that you won't get there, but just making it realistic for that time point.
Yeah. And also because running a business is challenging and it does take a lot. And so like, you don't want to create more friction that's necessary.
Yeah.
Like it's kind of like, how can you create ease? Things aren't necessarily going to be easy, but I'm always looking at like, how do we create ease in this experience so that you are getting a little bit more flow, or things are, you are able to produce. For you, it was like, okay, how do we produce more podcasts with less spend? What does that look like? Okay, cool. It could look like this over here. And then to your point, then you get to do that on your own schedule. You get to do it from home. It just becomes something where you're like, oh, getting momentum and maintaining consistency all of a sudden is easier than it was before. And that's what I need to keep me going and heading to where I want to go.
Totally. I think momentum is the most important thing. When you pick it up, just keep on riding that wave, because the minute you life always happens, so there's always going to be a break
Yeah.
in that momentum for sure. But if you can keep riding that wave, it's the best feeling, because you wake up with that buzz. You're always you're never dreading it. You're always excited to be there. So really working with the momentum, but as you say, making it easier or more friction free to sort of let that momentum sort of perpetuate organically.
Yeah, totally.
Possible.
If possible.
If
exactly.
possible. Well, it's such a pleasure. As I said, I was just so fond of our time together, and I always knew that I wanted to have you on the potty. So to have you here today, it's a huge gift. And your Substack is great, and I think it's a great podcast, especially if you go back to some of your very earlier pieces, to go back there for anyone who is diving into a business or they're a founder, because because you're very well read, Paul. You've read so much, and a lot of what you've put into your writing is like these great little gems of advice from many different parts. But I always get to the end of a Substack feeling educated,
Good.
entertained,
that's
sure,
nice.
but always educated in a really nice way.
Oh,
So
nice.
I can't speak
Okay,
more
that's
highly
lovely.
of you.
Thank you. Thanks, Tori. No, I really enjoyed the work that we did together. It was wonderful. And then now to be on the podcast is like a beautiful, completion. It's great.
Full circle.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you so much. I will, of course, pop all of your links to Substack, socials, website, all the rest. But now for today, enjoy your girls. I hope they recover soon. It is flu season. So as you can probably hear from my voice, we had it last week. So just never know what they're going to bring home. But it was so lovely to see your face. So
Thanks,
thank
Tori.
you so
That was
much.
lovely. I really appreciate it.